Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we are seeking a New Year progress update to discover how 18 months of government infrastructure ambition is actually being turned into real economic and social growth potential. To help me with this, I'm joined once again by Mike Reader, MP for Northampton South and the newly re-elected chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Infrastructure and Construction. And of course, as we heard in his first visit to the Infrastructure Podcast a year ago, before he was elected to Parliament in July, Mike was a director at construction giant Mace. Well, it certainly is an interesting moment for the sector. The UK entered the new year with infrastructure right at the centre of its growth strategy. Ministers are clear that better transport, energy, housing and digital networks are essential if we are to unlock the regional productivity, raise living standards and support the transition to net zero. As we have heard in so many episodes of the podcast, large projects are already underway, from new nuclear capacity and grid upgrades to major transport links and hospital programmes. But the real test, of course, is whether long-promised ambition can be converted into delivery, into economic value and public confidence. And at the same time, of course, we've got familiar structural challenges: slow planning, skill shortages, fragmented procurement, high cost and stubbornly low productivity, all of which continue to constrain output. The housing crisis remains acute, energy infrastructure is racing against time, and the UK's ageing assets demand smarter stewardship, not just new concrete. So, let's get a progress update from the heart of power and explore where the government is actually now doing enough to provide the certainty, mobilise private investment and modernise delivery. Mike, welcome back to the Infrastructure Podcast.
What an introduction. Lovely to be here again. Thank you for having me. And yeah, wow. There's a lot to cover there.
It's a busy time for you for sure. I mean, congratulations on being re-elected as the chair of the APPG on infrastructure. But of course, you're also on the Energy and Security and Net Zero Committee. You're chair of APGs for the Built Environment, Food and Drink and International Trade and Investment. And I see you've just been nominated to join the Parliamentary Assembly on the Council of Europe's Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development Committee.
Yes.
We'll hear a bit more about that a little bit later on. But it sounds like there's a lot going on. So kick off, 18 months into the job, how do you see your infrastructure priorities in Parliament? Is the UK finally getting serious about delivery, Mike?
I don't think we could be more serious about fixing what many in industry have talked about for years, which are the fundamental problems of productivity, of pace, and of affordability of delivering in the UK full stop, whether you're talking delivering major programmes, from HS2 down, new hospitals, prisons programmes, etc., right through to the small-scale schemes that actually make a bigger difference in many constituencies across the UK, expanding schools, expanding GP surgeries, fixing roads and all the things in between. I think it's fair to say, whilst there was a fair view of what needed to be done when the Labour Party was in opposition, being in government is a different step in terms of trying to unravel a civil service that works so incredibly slowly, the bureaucracy and challenge of how our political system works. Rightly so, there are a lot of checks and balances, I would argue, and many would argue too many, and that slows delivery down. But the first 18 months has been all about rebuilding and putting building blocks back in place to enable us to deliver and grow.
Which goes to the point I made, which is translating that ambition, that rhetoric into delivery. So are you seeing certain sectors or any particular sectors that are actually starting to win?
Yes, I am. And you know, people who listen to this podcast will be familiar with the challenges the industry faces. Perhaps Joe Public isn't. So they would think the government comes in, they click their fingers, and all of a sudden the housing market blossoms and we start building. People will know, for example, for housing, there are fundamental challenges that have started to be solved, planning being one, trying to strengthen trade with the EU being another, particularly for both workforce and supply of materials. But there are still other things that have to be done. But no, I think I'm seeing really positive signs in the housing sector. And I think Steve Reed, the Secretary of State, is moving really at pace now on that. We saw just this week new guidance and government kind of policy around design guides, which is something I've been kind of passionate about. How do we deliver quality as well as quantity? We saw before Christmas changes in how the BSR works. We've got new leadership with the Building Safety Regulator, which is cutting down waiting times. People talk to me a lot less now about planning and building safety regulators than they did before in the housing sector, which is a much more positive thing. But we're also seeing clean energy, right? We had AR7, Auction Round 7, announced 2 weeks ago, which delivered one of the, I think, if not the highest amount of investment into renewable energy we've ever seen. Supporting that, of course, is the transition network upgrades and, changes to how the energy market works, which aren't particularly sexy to put on the front of a leaflet, but are fundamental to addressing our energy costs. So, but these things take time. The frustrating thing for many people is they wish it would happen immediately, but we have checks and balances, rightly so, for safety, for quality, for due purpose, due process. Those are in place to make sure when we do this stuff, we do it right.
Well, I'm going to drill a little bit more into housing and energy in a moment, but you chair the APPG on infrastructure and construction, which in many ways brings your parliamentary work alongside the industry. What are your objectives for this year, and how do you think it can actually help to accelerate delivery?
I see the all-party groups that I run as critical friends into government, and I would say to industry and your listeners, Anthony, we act as a critical friend and as a funnel to bring ideas together from industry, from academia, from international comparators, and put them forward as policy to help guide departments in their delivery. So we're able to help guide, shape, and challenge where needed. But also the second focus of our APPG is very much building consensus within MPs. Generally, MPs are positive about infrastructure delivery until it gets messy and it's on their doorstep, and then they get complaints. So part of our role is to build advocates that can have those difficult conversations with that landowner who has had a bad experience. How do they resolve it, for example, and how does that stop becoming a serious problem when actually in the grand scheme of things, it's awful for that landowner, let's say, but actually for the communities that will be benefiting from major infrastructure, transmissions, etc. They can have those conversations passionately and powerfully.
But do you think we've got the pipeline, we've got the commitment to infrastructure? There has been talk about having a more statutory 10-year national infrastructure strategy, and perhaps even an infrastructure minister. Is that something which you think is useful, or would be useful, or is a possibility?
I've thought about this, and I've come full circle. There's often arguments that we should have so I do a lot of work in the logistics sector. We should have a minister for logistics and supply chain, because that goes across every single department. We do have a construction minister of sorts. So the industry minister, who is a minister of both the Department of Business Trade and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, kind of carries that construction minister hat that used to be a junior ministerial position in the Conservative government.
That's Chris McDonald, yeah?
Chris McDonald. And he is brilliant, by the way, absolutely brilliant, really switched on in the sector. I've not had a bad meeting experience with him at all. I think there is something in having a centralised function for delivery in government. And I've put that paper, I wrote a paper on it, looking at other governments, Hong Kong, Singapore in particular, how kind of some things have been done in places like Germany, in France, even the Build America Bureau and Royal Engineers, or the American engineers in America. There is an argument that there should be a much stronger delivery focus from central government, which could warrant the idea of having a central kind of minister for delivery. I think the way it's shaping, and there's been announcements for the central government in the last couple of weeks, that's kind of where Darren Jones, the chief secretary to the Prime Minister's job is. But his focus is turned to be more, how do we make public sector and government work more efficiently than necessarily delivery? So I would be cautious in criticising the government, because there's still plenty of things to do, but we maybe are missing a trick of not having a minister of that type of portfolio. The challenge I see, which is why I said kind of come full circle on that, I still think overall it would be a good idea. The challenge I would see, which would kind of makes me nervous, is that that's not how government works. So would it almost be a minister without department, and therefore they'd have no power, and they'd be more of like a minister for being a busybody and a bit annoying rather than doing. And that's the challenge, right? When people who've been in industry, and you've got someone who's kind of that kind of fixer in your business, who kind of might sit centrally, sometimes they're not in the detail and they can be more unhelpful than helpful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, major projects are advancing, and I suppose one of the big things which, when you look at getting value from investment in infrastructure, is, of course, the fundamentals around people having places to live and people having the ability to heat their homes effectively. So just tackling those particular issues. I mean, the government has committed to 1.5 million new homes. Do you think that is a number which is still actually politically and practically deliverable?
Yeah. I think I'm going to be the last remaining MP to say we can deliver 1.5 million homes. I think the more that target becomes undeliverable, the more it drives us to think of it as a challenge.
Yeah.
And so, a crisis. And when we start to think of things as a crisis, we start to really change how we work. Look what we delivered during COVID. Look what we've delivered in countries during wartime. Look how we've mobilised to deal with challenges that this country has faced for decades. I think the harder the pressure is on that 1.5 million, and we keep the pressure on to deliver it, the more innovative we see the public sector and we see industry in helping us.
And that's about moving from pro-housing language, I suppose, to actually getting shovels in the ground. And if there are lots of reasons why it is a difficult target to meet. But fundamentally, the reason that housing companies are not building houses is simply because it's just the costs are too high. I mean, is that the way you see it?
No, I think actually now one of the biggest challenges we have is access to finance for people buying. So,
oh right, so what? So the actual demand area then, rather than the supply.
We haven't yet rebuilt the demand. So house builders will say to me, they could build more, they could build quicker, but there isn't the demand. So we've got great opportunities in the UK. We've got private investment coming in to buy homes at scale. It's still. I know those who follow it. There's been a kind of big things with Donald Trump saying, "Don't want private companies buying family homes." In the UK, it's like 0.3% of all new homes go to institutional investors. We're talking tiny amount. Mm-hmm. Increasing that a bit makes a big difference in terms of speed, pace, productivity. But fundamentally, there is still a challenge for people accessing mortgage products. And it's interesting, NatWest this week announced a 6x salary mortgage.
Right.
That's good. So the government is changing some of the tightening that took place in regulation post the 2008 crash to make it easier for banks to lend. But we're also seeing improving lending practices and lending behaviour from banks as well. There is a question, though, of do we need a financial stimulus from government, help to buy type thing, which the government has been very reticent to say anything on, because I generally am not supportive of that or stamp duty holidays, because it generally, the data shows us it benefits the seller rather than the buyer. It may stimulate the market. It generally creates an artificial increase in house prices. And in reality, it doesn't deliver long-term changes. As soon as that incentive goes away, the house building starts to rise. So you kind of tie yourself in forever for using public money, for using taxpayers' money to help people to buy homes, rather than changing the environment so people can buy using the existing products that are available. And
I suppose, and beyond that, though, we've got a very clear kind of Labour YIMBY, yes in my backyard movement, which I suppose is coming up against the traditional NIMBY movement. Is that kind of now defining the political battleground when it comes to housing policy? Maybe
a little bit. Your listeners won't be able to hear, but behind me, I've got my blur on, there is a Labour YIMBY hat and my brickie, because I was named the YIMBY Parliamentarian of the Year. I think people are realising that there is a lot more support for development than they think. And it's very easy to get distracted or to get focused on the small amount of angry, loud voices who are anti-house building. And to take a real example in my constituency, there is a bit of brownfield land, old garages, and I think about 300 houses can be built on that plot. And the biggest outlier is because it's where people currently walk their dogs.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not great. I mean, there's all sorts of can destroy nature. There's no real great biodiversity. Yeah. It's old scrub land. So, but in reality, polling shows the vast majority of people actually will support that development. So what we don't have in the planning system and in our debate really is a representative approach of how we engage people. We go out essentially and say, do you object to this? And of course, if you object, you go, yes, I'm going to tell you I object. If you say no, it's fine, you crack on, you don't engage. Even there are some planning portals in the UK that don't allow you to log support for an application.
Yeah.
It says register your objection here. So there's literally no engagement to say, if you like this, tell us. And generally people won't, right? The only people who engage in the planning process will shout. So there is an education piece for MPs, for councillors, and for people more generally that actually, when you look at data, the polling that polling companies do around attitudes to house building, pro-building MPs are more likely to win their seats than anti-building MPs.
Oh, right.
The public will generally are much more favourable towards YIMBY than NIMBY. And my parliamentarian colleagues are slowly waking up to that.
Okay, well, it's interesting here because, of course, behind the house building sits the infrastructure that is absolutely vital to make sure that the communities that are developed, the neighbourhoods, actually function properly. Which moves me on to energy and the energy challenge we face, because you sit on the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee scrutinising government policy around energy. Sizewell C, we've got SMRs, we've got grid upgrades, and they're all moving forward. Are we genuinely then at the start of this energy infrastructure renaissance? And I'm talking about generation, but also actually delivery of that energy to where it's needed.
Yes, completely. What is really exciting is, as I said earlier, the latest auction round 7, delivering so much more offshore wind, particularly onshore wind, solar, but also the UK's first floating offshore wind, which we pilot projects, and it is a high price to pay to be an innovator. The price per megawatt will be well higher than we pay for fixed onshore wind, but it's recognised that investment is needed so that we continue this journey. We bring the cost down long term, but also we create jobs in places like South Wales, in Cornwall, around the Celtic Sea development, for example, that will bring manufacturing jobs back to communities that were decimated, partly through decarbonisation of industry. The ending of mining, the ending of steelmaking in Port Talbot, those kind of areas where whole communities were decimated as plants closed, as mines closed, as industry closed. Actually, there is a social benefit of investing in renewables in areas where you can create a long-term benefit for the community. But you're right to pick up distribution and transmission as well, because we can't just build lots of energy without having the transmission network to deliver it. And also the balancing needed through short-term and long-term storage as well, which is whether it's modern batteries that don't have all the challenges that people love to believe they have around burning the world down, but also longer term storage, using gas, using ammonia, using water, and the different ways that we need, because one of the challenges we face is the previous government got rid of all our gas storage, so we've got no balancing in our network. So short term thinking to make a bit of money, long term pain for us now as taxpayers.
Yeah. Should we be worried about our continued commitment to net zero? It seems to be losing quite a lot of political traction, that phrase.
I think the phrase is an interesting one. So one of our inquiries in the Select Committee is building support for the energy transition. And it comes from a place where there was political consensus, and there still is political consensus, that we need an energy transition. And the Conservatives would equally agree we need a transition away from fossil fuels. Their argument now, in response to reform, their U-turn is to say, well, we don't need it right now. We know all the evidence says we do need it. All the scientific proof says we need it. It's politically advantageous for them to say we don't need it right now. We'll do it later. Because, of course, when you do things later, it's cheaper. Of course, it bloody isn't. It'll cost twice as much money and the problem will be a lot worse. One of the things we kind of have explored is language. And the term net zero has started to have connotations and toxicity around it that maybe changes the discussion. When you talk about the challenge actually in terms of energy security, that if Putin or another power decided to attack the UK or attack Europe, where would you start? And we see in Ukraine, you would start with the energy system. And the UK, being on reliant gas in particularly, through previously Russia, but through LPG from America, through the gas network that's coming to the UK, and also North Sea oil gas, to an extent, is really vulnerable to energy insecurity. If you wanted to stop the UK economy in its tracks, you would stop the LPG tankers coming from America into the UK, and the UK would fall apart. So we have to have sovereignty. And when you talk about sovereignty and protection of our energy systems, there is a lot more support. It's exactly the same project we would do. It'd be framing it differently from saying it's net zero to reduce the impact of the environment and carbon to protecting your costs and energy security. So actually a lot more of the focus that we should think government should have is be really talking heavily about the cost of energy and how to reduce the cost of energy rather than how do we deliver net zero. Same outcome, different words.
Yeah, just different words. So maybe rename the committee from net zero. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, no, we are the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee, and
Right,
I often find myself saying I'm on the Energy Security Select Committee. In the current world environment, that probably resonates better with people saying in the Net Zero Department, which sounds like a load of people in hemp trousers, kind of wandering around, carrying a Brompton bike under their arm.
Yeah. Let's talk about ageing infrastructure for a moment, because you recently were at the launch of the National Engineering Policy Centre's new report on ageing infrastructure. And that said, by investing wisely now in our infrastructure, our existing infrastructure in the UK, it can safeguard essential services, support economic growth, and develop world-leading expertise in infrastructure stewardship. Politicians love cutting new ribbons. How do we make maintenance politically exciting and sexy?
I think there is more of a move towards understanding that small projects deliver bigger difference. So whether that's maintenance or it's small scale expansion, new build, etc. There is a general view that we're not very good at delivering big stuff. And HS2 particularly has skewed that public opinion. We've seen the introduction of Northern Powerhouse Rail. Another big project that would take decades for people to see a real impact. So when you talk to people like, we can make these small changes now that will make your life better, actually, there's much better political consensus around that. There's much better public support for that. If you said we're going to have a real focus on fixing your roads, Northamptonshire is one of the worst in the country. It's got a red rating from government, despite the council having double the amount of money under this Labour government. They've still not managed to get on top of their pothole problem. If you said we're going to, that's what we're going to focus on now, and you'll see a real difference, and people see it, that is a difference that people see. But there's no. You're right. There's no ribbon to cut when you're fixing a pothole.
No, but the £1 spent, the NEPC says £1 spent on preventative maintenance can save £5 to £10 in future costs and damages avoided. That's a big. Surely, the government would be kind of like, we want a bit of that.
Well, spend to save is always the right thing to do, but often there is a view that we don't spend anything. We're saving money, right? So we can spend to save now, spend the money now, so we save money in future. But political focus, balancing budgets. Well, if we don't need to do it now, do we put it off? It's a bit like our conversation just now on net zero. The opposition's view is just don't do it now, we'll do it later. But just like this maintenance challenge, it will cost 10 times as much when you do it later than it will now, and become a lot harder.
Well, local authorities, of course, bear the brunt of this liability. I mean, you've got 7.4 billion, I think, 4-year settlement that was put behind local authorities, but we've still got a vast backlog. Particularly, you mentioned potholes around road maintenance. I mean, can that realistically ever be changed? Is it just a question of throwing more money at it?
Partly, it is that it needed more money. So that's why, for my county, for example, we doubled the amount of money coming from central government to support the council, on top of the receipts they get from council tax, business rates, and other routes of investment. We double the money they get to deliver potholes improvements. The challenge is they're not being spent, and that's through council inefficiency. It's through political will and poor political leadership from council leaders, and ultimately it's through lack of capacity locally, having been kind of worn away over successive years of Conservative and now Reform leadership in Northamptonshire, that I see there isn't the ability to spend that money, and so people are still frustrated. And as our report says, unless you deal with the problem early, the problem gets bigger later on as well. And that's what we see in Northamptonshire now, because the roads haven't been maintained for the best part of a decade. Yeah, no amount of patch fixing will solve it. It requires wholesale replacement of the surface of roads, which is a hell of a job, which is costly, which is disruptive, means road closures. And often the roads that are most badly impacted are those that are the main trunk roads where you've got buses, ambulances, etc. Just around my office where we are now, I did a pothole video for social media. The council must have seen it, because within a week they come and fixed all the massive, chunky, deep potholes. But this is a route that ambulances are going in and out of the hospital. I'm next to the hospital. the fact that they hadn't thought we'd better keep the road to the hospital flat because all those patients coming in, it could be a life or death situation, and we've got ambulances, driving through craters in the road with patients in the back is absolutely nonsense, and it's that poor sight and poor political focus that creates that problem.
Yeah, I want to talk a bit more about the skills challenges around the industry. But before that, I mentioned that you are been nominated for the Parliamentary Assembly for the Council of Europe's Social Affairs Health Sustainable Development Committee.
What a mouthful.
Well, what is it? What does it do? What's it all about?
So, after the Second World War, the Council of Europe was set up. And it can be confusing. So there is a Council of Europe, there is also a European Council, and there is also the EU, right? So we're talking three different bodies. But the Council of Europe was set up to be a pan-European council that promotes and protects the rights of people, human rights, democracy, rule of law. And it is the body that oversees the European Court of Human Rights. So I'm a delegate for the UK to the Council of Europe, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I go every quarter. And a bit like in our government, they have committees, essentially, which are kind of select committees. But rather than scrutinising the council, because the council doesn't have kind of law-making powers, the committees work pan-Europe to set a position and guidance for the member states to adopt on different points. And I'm on now being made a full member of this committee that looks particularly at sustainable development, health, and social affairs. For our industry, some of the stuff that committee has looked at in the past is, rights of migrant workers. We look at health matters, and it's fascinating because you're in a genuine cross-European. I think it's 46 member states who are members, and that includes the 27 odd members of the European Union, plus observers from places like Jordan and Israel and Canada. But you're in a room that is really politically different to the UK because there are some very open right-wing views that people feel are very kind of normal to make, and open, very hard left-wing views as well in the same room. So it is a fascinating experience of trying to create consensus across 46 countries and of a political spectrum that goes from a far-right Putin-supporting bloc to a far-left Putin-supporting bloc.
Right, yeah.
And then the left, the centre, and the right in the middle where we sit. So the Labour group sits with the Socialists, the left, the Lib Dems sit in Aldi, which is the centrists, and then the Conservatives sit in the right. But there are people more right than Conservatives who would say, we support Putin, and there's more to the left, which are almost Putin apologists again.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, alongside the important industry issues that, I talk to you about, and, many folks around infrastructure talk to you about, there's also major geopolitical debates and challenges. As a backbench MP, how do you see your role influencing those big debates around Ukraine, around immigration, around Greenland, Gaza, trade wars, online safety, etc.?
I don't think all members of Parliament take the same view, but my view is you've got to focus on where you can make a difference. And so I focus on my policy areas of the built environment, which include infrastructure and construction, of food and drink policy and health in relation to food and drink, but in trade, and within that logistics as well, and then energy security. So I will give my view on social media, and I had a private meeting with the Secretary of State with a number of MPs who'd raised the issue before the statements last week on consultation on, phone bans, social media bans, etc. And I'll make my views known privately on matters, particularly when constituents raise it with me. But I think politics is a team sport, and you have to work as a team, and there are better placed to advocate from the backbenchers on those points. And I will advocate for the areas where I have genuine knowledge and genuine, if you like, clout, that when I say things matter. If I turned up and start talking about Greenland, they'd be like, isn't that Mike, the trade and construction guy? There's obviously a trade and construction angle to Greenland, but actually, is that the thing that really helps? Yeah. And the other thing you have to come back to is what's the thing that really helps my constituents? So if it was a difference between me going and advocating to get more money for a GP surgery or getting involved on a debate on the war in Sudan, both are equally important globally, but to people in Northampton, I know which one they want me to be focused on, and that's what you have to remember.
Well, anyone looking at your social media will quickly get the idea. You've got a lot of plates spinning. 18 months into the job, I mean, are you balancing those different parliamentary pressures then?
Yeah, pretty well. It's busy. But that was the job I came in for. I was busy when I was at Mace. I've been busy through my life with work and with hobbies. And I'll continue to be busy now.
Yeah. Well, look, a quick romp through a couple of points. One about skills. There's been a lot of talk about whether or not there is this mismatch between skills supply and demand in the sector. Do we need to genuinely move towards a demand-led skills model so that there actually are jobs, available for the skills that we're training?
Yeah, there is a central pipeline published by government through an organisation called NISTA, and the next iteration of that pipeline comes out next month, and there is an intention to start to wrap into that an estimate the skills demand or the resource demand for the major programmes that the government is supporting. There's about 700 projects on the programme. I would argue there is much more needed now by tier ones, particularly on, if you like, filling in the next level of the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't mind being relatively bullish, and I've had some trade bodies come to me in the last few weeks saying, the pipeline's not good enough for our members. And let's say, for example, one was a trade body representing plant hire. My argument would be that's not the government's job.
Mm-hmm.
Go tell your clients, go tell Balfour Beatty, Kia, Wilmore Dixon, Mace that you want to see their pipeline feel, and you want a plant hire pipeline, so your members can work out when they're going to bid for plant hire jobs. Right? That's not the job of government. That is the job of industry. Government sets the strategy, sets the programs, and from my time at Mace, there was a very good supply chain relationship and briefings, but it's not in the public domain because of commerciality. So it is still a bit of a boys' club for the supply chain, and that's a big challenge that industry has to face itself. Is how do you get transparency within the supply chain of opportunity of the skills needed, the resource needed, which programs are going forward, which contractors are where, which is where you get organisations like Glenigan's and others, I think, are a valuable skill, where they provide that data to help industry focus on where they need to go.
Yeah. Do you think the industry is being honest enough about its reputational problem when it comes to attracting people?
The Construction Skills Mission Board, which is co-chaired by Dame Jackie Smith of the House of Lords and the Skills Minister, and Mark Reynolds, the Construction Leadership Council Chair and the Chief Executive of Mace, I don't know what he is now, Executive Chief Executive. He's got some special job, hasn't he? Would say there isn't there isn't a supply problem. Now, when I say this to industry, it's not true, but we train more people than we have jobs for in the industry at the moment. Even with the high churn rate we see from college, there are some colleges where the churn rate of people out of college into work is like 30%. So 70% of people studying a construction skill at college won't go into the construction sector. So there's a high churn.
Yeah. Well, that's a point that Mark makes. Mark does make that point very strongly.
Yeah. Technical colleges much better, which is why the government is focusing on these 10 specialist technical colleges focused around where the big projects are. So kind of a hub and spoke model. So you would argue, they would argue there is the supply. What we don't have is demand. Demand comes from growth, demands from jobs, demands from stimulus for employing apprentices, etc. I would urge on that. I think you can have as much supply as you want, but if the supply is not of the quality you need in the first place, no matter how many jobs you have, you're never going to fill them. And I think that would be the broader view of industry. The data would say, yes, we train loads of people and there aren't as many jobs, but actually are we drawing in the best talent into the industry? I would argue we still aren't, which is why I still advocate there should be much more focus on drawing people, high quality people we need into industry, not always seeing as the thing that the naughty kids get put onto, rather than going and doing French language classes, they go do bricklaying. Do you know what I mean? Like it should be much higher, which is why I advocate for a GCSE in the built environment. If we've seen has been successful in Wales, which is why I advocate for a national campaign to bring people into the sector.
Right, so just trying to make sure that the industry is attracting. Well, it's got more aspiration, I suppose. It's becoming more of an aspirational career.
Exactly, because as well as we're needing brilliant tradespeople, and there's a massive shortage of tradespeople in our industry. People who work on the ground, if you like, in the jobs. We need skilled data engineers now. We need skilled scientists in the sector. We need skilled engineers. We need problem solvers, project managers. How do we compete with the other sectors that also need those skills? Construction definitely doesn't stand out. If you were someone looking at data science, do you go into the construction sector or do you go into AI?
Yeah,
I know where most people go, even though being in construction would be, I think, be much more valuable because you're working in that environment, but you're working in a real environment that you can see the change you make. That's what excites the sector so much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about digital transformation. I mean, is the industry embracing it sufficiently? Are we up to speed with where we should be when it comes to the use of technology?
There's still work to do. I'm doing a little mini inquiry at the moment, just kind of slightly for fun with another MP, Pam Cox, who's an MP in Essex. We just put on LinkedIn, we'd like views, and we've done a questionnaire and kind of pulling people's views together on AI in construction. Had about 50 respondents from big tier ones through to niche.
Oh, right. I saw it. I saw you were looking for it, yeah.
I don't know how many people will fill the survey in, but it's easy to click on LinkedIn and say, contact me and find out more. Well, I'll ask you some questions, you can come back to me, and you will have known this from your time in journalism. There's lots of very keen people, but asking people to do a bit of work is a different matter. It's interesting, there's kind of some common themes coming out. There's a lot of focus in industry around how to use technology for productivity. But there's a lot of people doing the same thing. And there perhaps isn't an incubator or a thing that's drawing that together. There's a lot of unicorns and people rushing to try and be the first. There's also a lot of focus on safety. And I think AI, digital tools have a big role to play in increasing and improving our already brilliant safety culture in our country. And then the sort of product side, how do we productize construction and use different tools and technologies to help us build, is definitely coming out. That's probably the hardest thing a little bit.
Well, certainly there was a lot of discussion at the last Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit around the use of AI. Everyone was using it, but very few people had a strategy. So there's a risk that it gets used for the wrong purposes or unintentionally, etc. Just to wrap up then, just looking at the year ahead then, I mean, you're clearly very bullish about the infrastructure's fortunes over the next 12 months. What does success look like for you? I mean, what does success look like for the government's infrastructure agenda?
I think house building starts is a big measure, and I'm interested to see the stats as they start to come out back end of this year. It will take that while to see that coming through, as you know, the stimulus now in terms of planning, in terms of reform of some of the things that MHCLG have released will take time to come through. The changes in the job market, I think, is an interesting one. Now that the Employment Rights Bill has gone through Parliament, there's less of an emphasis for the media to kind of dig up James Reed to talk negatively about recruitment numbers. Well, actually, what do they look like now towards the end of the year? I think that's a good measure. Ultimately, the big measure is impact on GDP and particularly productivity, the gross value add per person. And so looking at those measures and how those are kind of reported, I think is an interesting one. There is kind of a subtle metric, which I think is an interesting one, is do we start complaining about developer profit? So if you suddenly get the Simmons makes £1 billion profit and they pay for the chief exec £100 million bonus again, it's not great, but arguably that's actually a good sign that we have started to stimulate the market. We haven't talked about developer profit for a long time. Developers do make a high profit margin compared to the rest of the construction sector. When we start delivering at volume, what does that mean to their profitability? Do we start to see those headlines? That's a funny kind of slightly anti-measure of success, but if we start talking about people making riches out of the industry, it probably means that actually we're stimulating it.
Yeah, maybe also Northampton's roads may be less potholed 12 months' time.
Yes, maybe.
Well, look, Mike, thanks so much for giving us a quick update there. Really interesting times ahead. And thanks so much for all the work you're doing. I'm certainly going to keep an eye on what the APPGs are all up to, and keep an eye on what you're up to in terms of trying to drive forward the industry. So thanks for sharing your thoughts today. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
That's an absolute pleasure, but sadly that's all we've got time for right now on the podcast, but there is more in the pipeline, more issues as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Mike, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.